The summer of 1943 burned hot across the cornfields of Nebraska, but nothing burned hotter than the shame in Jack Morrison's chest as he stood in the scrapyard that used to be his father's auto shop. The sign above the door, Morrison and Son Mechanics, hung crooked on one hinge, a perfect symbol of everything that had gone wrong since the day his application to the Army Air Corps came back stamped rejected in angry red letters. Jack was 24 years old, 6 feet tall, with hands that could rebuild an engine blindfolded and a mind that saw mechanical solutions the way other men saw dreams. But none of that mattered to the recruitment officer who had looked at his medical file, seen the childhood polio that left him with a slight limp, and dismissed him without a second glance. Every morning, Jack watched the formations of B-17 bombers thunder overhead from the nearby Lincoln Army Airfield, their silver bellies glinting in the sun as they headed east for training runs. Every morning, he felt the knife twist a little deeper. His 3 best friends from high school were up there somewhere over Europe, fighting the Nazis while he fixed tractors for farmers who paid him in eggs and promises. The Bell brothers ran the only other garage in town, and they never let him forget it. Tom Bell, who got rejected from the military for flat feet, had somehow turned that rejection into a badge of honor, claiming he was too valuable on the home front. Every Saturday night at Murphy's Bar, Tom would buy rounds for the house and make sure everyone knew that Morrison's boy was the cripple who couldn't serve. Jack's mother had died the previous winter, pneumonia taking her in 3 brutal days. His father had followed 6 weeks later. The doctor said heart attack, but Jack knew better. His father had died of a broken heart, watching his only son become the town's symbol of inadequacy. The shop, once the pride of Franklin County, now barely made enough to keep the lights on. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Jack was under a Hudson Commodore, wrestling with a transmission that had more problems than solutions, when he heard the sound. Every mechanic knows the sound of an engine in distress, but this was different. This was a Pratt & Whitney R1830 radial engine, 14 cylinders of American engineering, and it was screaming. Jack rolled out from under the Hudson so fast he cracked his head on the frame. Through the open bay door, he saw the B-17 coming in low, too low, black smoke pouring from its number 3 engine. The bomber was fighting for altitude, losing the battle with every second. Cleared the treeline by maybe 30 feet, the pilot performing a miracle just to keep it airborne. But Jack wasn't watching the bomber anymore. He was watching something else. In the distance, barely visible against the clouds, 3 dark shapes were following the wounded B-17. They were too far away to identify, but Jack's instincts, honed by 10,000 hours of mechanical problem-solving, told him something was terribly wrong. He ran to his father's old workshop, where the radio sat gathering dust. His hands shook as he turned it on, spinning the dial until he found the military frequency he had been monitoring for months, hoping to hear something, anything, that would make him feel connected to the war effort. What he heard instead made his blood run cold. The tower at Lincoln Army Airfield was in chaos. Multiple bombers were reporting attacks during training exercises. Equipment malfunctions. Engine failures. 3 planes down in the last 10 days. 18 casualties. The voice on the radio was trying to stay professional, but Jack could hear the panic underneath. And then he heard something else. Pattern. Every attack happened within a specific radius. Every malfunction occurred at a certain altitude. Every failure followed the same mechanical signature. Jack's mind started racing, connecting dots that no one else could see because no one else had spent their entire life thinking like a machine. He grabbed a pencil and started sketching on the back of an invoice. His hands moved with certainty, drawing angles, trajectories, mechanical systems. The limp that had kept him out of the war disappeared as he paced back and forth, his mind completely absorbed in the puzzle. By the time the sun set over Nebraska, Jack Morrison had 2 things: a theory that sounded impossible and a decision that would change everything. If he was right, someone was shooting down American planes over American soil, and they were doing it with a weapon so simple, so crude, that the military brass would never see it coming. He looked at his drawing one more time, then at the pile of scrap metal in the corner of his shop. Tomorrow, he would do something that would either prove he was crazy or prove he was the one person who could stop whatever was killing American airmen in the heartland of America. Tomorrow, Jack Morrison would start building. Jack didn't sleep that night. By dawn, his shop floor was covered in sketches, calculations, and half-assembled pieces of scrap metal that looked like the fever dream of a madman. He had torn apart his father's hunting rifle, cannibalized parts from 3 broken car engines, and welded together a frame using pipes from the old water heater. What emerged looked nothing like a traditional weapon. It was crude, ugly, and based on a principle so simple that Jack almost laughed at the audacity of it. If his theory was correct, someone had figured out how to create a mechanical projectile launcher that could reach bombers at training altitude without making the signature sound of conventional anti-aircraft fire. At 8 in the morning, Jack loaded his contraption into his pickup truck and drove straight to Lincoln Army Airfield. The guards at the gate looked at him like he had escaped from an asylum. His clothes were covered in grease, his eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and he was demanding to speak with the commanding officer about a security threat. They laughed him off the base. Jack tried again at noon, this time bringing his diagrams. The same guards threatened to arrest him if he didn't leave. One of them, a young private who couldn't have been more than 19, actually pushed him backward, causing Jack to stumble on his bad leg. The humiliation burned worse than any physical pain. That's when Tom Bell pulled up in his pristine Cadillac, delivering parts to the base garage. Tom saw the whole thing, saw Jack on the ground, saw the guards laughing. That night at Murphy's bar, Tom made sure everyone in Franklin County heard about it. Morrison's cripple, he called Jack, went crazy and tried to break into the airbase with some kind of junk sculpture, claiming he could save the military with trash from his daddy's dead shop. The next morning, another B-17 went down. For more men dead. Jack heard it on the radio and put his fist through the wall of his shop. He called the airbase again. They hung up on him. He tried to reach someone at the War Department in Washington. No one would transfer his call. By the 5th day, Jack realized the horrible truth. No one was going to listen to a crippled mechanic from Nebraska. Not when pilots were dying. Not when the Army had their own experts, their own engineers, their own systems. He was nothing. A ghost in his own town. Invisible to the people who mattered. Helpless while American boys fell from the sky. Jack Morrison sat alone in his shop, staring at his homemade weapon, and understood that being right meant nothing if no one would let you. On the 7th day, Jack stopped asking for permission. He spent the entire night studying the attack patterns, cross-referencing weather reports, training schedules, and topographical maps of the surrounding farmland. Every incident happened within a 12-mile radius of a specific area, an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of town that used to manufacture agricultural equipment before the Depression killed it. Jack loaded his weapon into the truck bed, covered it with a tarp, and drove out to the complex at 3 in the morning. The buildings were skeletal ruins, windows shattered, machinery rusted into abstract sculptures. But Jack wasn't looking at the buildings. He was looking at the sightlines, the elevation, the clear view of the flight paths overhead. He set up his weapon on the roof of the tallest structure, pointing it at nothing, waiting. The morning training runs would start at 0600. If his calculations were right, if his theory held, he would see the proof with his own eyes. At 5:45 he heard it. Not from the sky but from below. The sound of metal on metal, mechanical and rhythmic. Jack crawled to the edge of the roof and looked down into the courtyard of the complex. 3 men were assembling something in the pre-dawn darkness. Their weapon was bigger than Jack's, more sophisticated, but built on the same principle he had discovered. A compressed air launcher, powerful enough to fire a steel projectile at high velocity, silent enough to avoid detection. They were German saboteurs, speaking in hushed voices, preparing for another morning of murder. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. He should run. He should find help. But there was no time. The bombers would be overhead in minutes, and these men would kill again. He positioned his homemade weapon, his hands steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. He had built it to prove a theory, not to use it. But theories didn't matter anymore. Only action mattered. The German weapon fired first, a sharp hiss of compressed air. Jack watched the projectile arc upward, tracking toward a B-17 that was climbing through the morning sky. He could see the bomber, could see the trajectory, could see the mathematics of murder playing out in real time. Jack fired. His projectile intercepted theirs in midair, a collision so precise it seemed impossible. The German's shot fell harmlessly to the ground. The saboteurs froze, looking around in confusion. If you're holding your breath right now, wondering what happens next, hit that subscribe button. Because what this mechanic did in the next 10 days would force the German High Command to send an urgent message that would be declassified 70 years later. Jack fired again. The second shot hit the German launcher itself, a direct strike that shattered their firing mechanism into useless scrap. The 3 saboteurs scattered like roaches in sudden light, running for the tree line. Jack didn't chase them. He was already radioing the airbase on the frequency he had memorized, his voice shaking but clear. This time they listened. Within 20 minutes, the complex was surrounded by military police. They found the destroyed German weapon, found the evidence of 7 previous attacks, found shell casings and trajectory calculations written in German. They also found Jack Morrison, sitting on the roof with his homemade launcher, looking more tired than triumphant. Colonel Robert Hayes, the airbase commander, climbed up to meet him. Hayes was a career officer, a man who had flown combat missions over France in the Great War, and he looked at Jack's weapon with a mixture of disbelief and respect. "You built this in your garage," he said. "It wasn't a question." Jack nodded. "I tried to tell you, tried to warn someone, anyone." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would change everything. "We need more of these. Can you build them?" Over the next 10 days, Jack Morrison transformed his dead father's shop into a weapons laboratory. The military provided materials, engineers, and protection. But they didn't provide the crucial element, the mechanical intuition that allowed Jack to improve his design with each iteration. He built 12 launchers, each one more refined than the last. He trained Army personnel on their operation, teaching them the mathematics of interception, the art of reading flight patterns. His bad leg didn't matter anymore. His rejection didn't define him. For the first time since the war began, Jack Morrison was exactly where he belonged. The German saboteurs tried twice more to attack training flights. Both times, Jack's weapons intercepted them. The second attempt ended with all 3 saboteurs captured alive. Under interrogation, they revealed something that made Hayes go pale. They had been reporting their success back to German High Command. The destruction of American bombers on home soil was considered a major intelligence and sabotage victory. But then the attacks stopped working. The Americans had developed a countermeasure, something the Germans couldn't understand or replicate. Hayes showed Jack the decoded message that German High Command sent to their remaining American saboteur cells after the 18th interception. It was 3 words long, written in bureaucratic German military terseness. "Abort Operation Scarecrow. 18 bombers saved. 18 crews that would go on to fight over Europe. All because a crippled mechanic refused to accept that his contribution didn't matter." The military wanted to keep Jack's story classified. "National security," they said. "Can't let the enemy know how we stopped them." Jack understood, even though part of him wanted the people of Franklin County to know, wanted Tom Bell to see that the cripple had done more for the war effort than any of them. But Colonel Hayes had other plans. He submitted Jack's name for a commendation, pushed it through channels that normally moved at bureaucratic glacial pace. 3 weeks after the last interception, Jack found himself standing in a ceremony at Lincoln Army Airfield, surrounded by the same guards who had laughed him off the base. They weren't laughing anymore. The Secretary of War himself had flown in from Washington. He pinned the Medal for Merit on Jack's chest, the highest civilian award the nation could offer. The citation was carefully worded to avoid classified details, but everyone in attendance knew what it meant. This man had saved American lives through extraordinary ingenuity and courage. The pilots whose planes Jack had saved insisted on meeting him. 18 crews, over 150 men, lined up to shake his hand. Some of them cried. One young bombardier, barely 20 years old, hugged Jack and whispered thank you over and over until his captain gently pulled him away. Tom Bell was there too, standing in the back of the crowd. The military had requisitioned his garage for classified work, which meant Tom got to see every piece of equipment that came and went. He had seen Jack's weapons. He had heard the stories. When their eyes met across the tarmac, Tom looked away first. The ceremony ended with Hayes offering Jack a position as a civilian contractor, designing defensive systems for the Army Air Corps. The pay was more than Jack had made in 5 years at the garage. He would work with real engineers, have access to proper facilities, contribute to the war effort in ways he had never imagined possible. Jack accepted on one condition. He wanted to keep his father's shop, wanted to maintain it as a working garage for the people of Franklin County who needed it. The military agreed. They even assigned 2 mechanics to help him run it while he worked on classified projects. That night, Jack stood in the shop, looking at the crooked sign that still read Morrison and Son Mechanics. He thought about his father, about how proud he would have been. Not because Jack had won a medal or saved lives, but because Jack had refused to let rejection define him, had turned shame into purpose, had proven that contribution comes in forms the world doesn't always recognize. He straightened the sign on its hinges. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to stay up. 3 years later, in the summer of 1946, Jack Morrison stood in front of a very different building. Morrison Defense Solutions occupied a modern facility on the outskirts of Lincoln, employing 47 people, 12 of them veterans who had learned that the man with a limp understood their struggles better than anyone. The war was over. The classified details of Operation Scarecrow had been sealed in a vault in Washington. But the lessons Jack had learned, the innovations he had pioneered, had transformed American defensive technology. His patents were used in radar systems, anti-aircraft improvements, and interceptor designs that would serve the nation for decades. The old garage still stood in Franklin County, run by 2 veterans Jack had hired. They fixed tractors and cars for farmers, often taking eggs and promises as payment, just like Jack once had. Above the door, the Morrison and Son sign hung straight and proud, freshly painted. Tom Bell had sold his garage in 1944 and moved to California. Some said he couldn't handle living in the shadow of the man he had mocked. Jack never spoke badly of him. He understood that shame makes people cruel, and that forgiveness costs nothing. Colonel Hayes, now General Hayes, had become one of Jack's closest friends. They met monthly for dinner, 2 men who had learned that talent appears in unexpected places, that rejection is often just a failure of imagination by those doing the rejecting. On Jack's desk sat a framed document, declassified just that year. It was the German High Command message, the one that had ordered the abort of Operation Scarecrow. Beneath the German text, an American translator had added a note explaining the context. Enemy has developed unknown defensive capability. Sabotage operations no longer viable. Recommend immediate cessation. A mechanic from Nebraska had forced the German military to change their strategy. That reality still made Jack smile. He walked to the window and watched a formation of new bombers fly overhead, B-29 superfortresses heading west for training. The war was over, but the work of defending the nation never ended. And Jack Morrison, the man they said couldn't serve, had found his way to serve after all. Thank you for staying with Jack's story until the very end. If this reminded you that rejection is not the end of your story, that purpose finds those who refuse to give up, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think about Jack's journey, and subscribe to this channel because we have dozens more incredible true stories coming your way. What other historical moments would you like to hear about? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, remember that your contribution matters, even when the world can't see it yet.